Cleopatra lay dead in her sealed chamber, lips ashen veins, dark beneath cold skin. Charmian, trembling, used her last shuddering breath to straighten the queen's dim, replying, "Fitting for one descendant of so many kings," before collapsing in death. Nearby another attendant lay lifeless, and a basket of figs said to her concealed. The ASP sat half-eaten, flies crawling across damn fruit to Rome. It was victory to the ancient world. It was the most horrible, agonizing death imaginable. Cleopatra was born around 69 BCE in Alexandria, the glittering capital of the Tome Kingdom. When she inherited the throne at just 18, she was already renowned for her remarkable intellect, fluent in Greek, Egyptian, and reportedly several other tongues. She could charm foreign envoys in their own language and debate philosophers with a poise rare even among men. Ancient writers noted her presence was not solely in her looks, but in her voice, soft, melodic, calculated, which could bend the wheels of generals and scholars alike. Even Plutarch, who wrote long after her death, conceded that her allure lay less in physical beauty than in the force of her personality, an aura that blurred the line between mortal queen and living goddess. Her rise began almost the moment she seized power exile. During palace intrigues, she returned with Roman backing and reclaimed her throne, presenting herself not as a pawn of the empire, but as Isis reborn with Julius Caesar. She bore son Caesarion stake a claim that unsettled Rome itself. Later, she bound herself to Mark Antony in pageants of divine theater, sailing upriver as the goddess Isis, while an Antony played the role of Dionysus. Banquets overflowed with gold and gems grounded to powder, and drunken wine gestures meant to show that Egypt's wealth outshone Rome's treasury. She was not merely surviving in a world dominated by Roman steel. She was bending it, turning private liaisons into geopolitical weapons. It terrified the Senate, but the grandeur concealed a dangerous truth. Romans whispered that she was a sorceress who used drugs and perfumes to enslave men, and Octavian propaganda painted her as the Eastern temptress, corrupting the Republic. Even with Egypt, famine and debt knotted her subjects, and priests murmured that the goddess she claimed to embody was turning her gaze elsewhere. Still, she pressed on summoning philosophers, astrologers, and mercenaries to her court, plotting with Antony to divide Rome's dominions between their children. To her enemy, she seemed untouchable, a woman who had revived dynastic glory in an age when monarchies across the Hellenistic world were crumbling. How then did this embodiment of intellect and spectacle end up confined in the stifling mausoleum, her empire stolen, waiting for the bite of a serpent or the sting of a poison pen? The turning point came in September of 31 BCE, when Cleopatra and Mark Antony risked everything at the naval battle of Actium. Cleopatra, whose fleet gleamed with sails dyed in Tyrian purple and decks and legged with silver, watched as Octavian Admiral Agrippa cut off her squadrons from the open sea. Antony's men, already weakened by hunger and disease, began defecting mid-fight, their ships swinging around to strike their former comrades. Ancient writers agree that when Cleopatra ordered her ships to break away, Antony abandoned the battle to follow her, a decision that shattered the morale of his men and branded him a deserter in his own camp. From that day onward, the empire was not merely weakened, it was finished. The disaster also marked a shift in her presence and authority. Only days earlier, Cleopatra had been planning Egypt's dominance of the Mediterranean, dispatching orders to her Red Sea fleet and securing allies in Syria. Now she could only watch as kings and generals defected to Octavian, bringing soldiers and treasure with them. Some ancient accounts claim she tried to rally Antony by promising reinforcements. Others say she began preparing her mausoleum, even then convinced that dynasty was doomed. Modern historians emphasize that Actium was not just a military collapse, but a psychological one. Antony and Cleopatra returned to Alexandria already as prisoners of fate each month. After Actium brought fresh humiliation in July of 30 BCE, Octavian legions entered Egypt with almost no resistance, seizing Lucian in the east and Peritonium in the west. Cleopatra withdrew to her mausoleum with the treasure, swearing to burn it rather than let Rome take it outside. Chaos swept through Alexandria as word spread that she had sealed herself away. A false report reached Antony that she was already dead, shattered by defeated Actium, abandoned by allies, and now believing he had lost his queen for whom he had fought. Antony drew his sword and drove it into his stomach, but the wound wasn't immediately fatal. As his blood poured out, he begged his attendants to carry him to her. Ancient writers describe the scene with brutal detail. Antony, Half conscious and writhing, was hauled up to the high window of Cleopatra's tomb, lacking the strength to open the doors. She and her women tied ropes to his body and pulled him through the window, his blood staining the stone as he was dragged inside, when at last he collapsed in her arms. Cleopatra tore her garments in grief, pressed his blood to her face, and cried aloud over the man who had once ruled the eastern half of the Roman world. Antony, barely able to speak, urged her to place her trust in Octavian's officer pro, then slipped into death. His end was humiliating. A Roman general undone, not on the battlefield, but in despair, bleeding out in a queen's private sanctuary. Cleopatra, broken with grief, yet still defiant, attempted to torch the chamber with her treasures, gold jewels and scrolls stacked in the corners, preferring that the flame consume them rather than Rome. The fire spread quickly, but Roman soldiers stormed the doors, doused ablaze, and secured her alive. The treasures of Egypt passed into Octavian's hands, but in Antony's body remained where it had fallen, a ruin in the arms of the last pharaoh. Cleopatra's body by then bore the strain of rain collapsing under siege. Roman observers reported she had grown gaunt, her eyes bloodshot from sleepless nights, her once celebrated complexion dulled by stress and fasting. Egyptian depictions, however, continued to preserve her as divine, serene, youthful, untouched by the total of war. The clash between Roman Makkah and Egyptian sanctity reveals not just two portraits of a queen, but two competing visions of power itself. Her final weeks were spent under the weight of August punishing Alexandrian heat. The air inside the mausoleum was heavy, humid, and carried the tang of the Nile. Yet she is said to have abstained from food, embracing ritual fasting, as both penance and preparation dead. She was proof of Rome's victory, assembled emptied to power. Octavian ordered her buried inside Antony, perhaps out of a gesture of clemency or perhaps to stage their union as a moral lesson. Passion destroyed them both. Yet, in doing so, he preserved the legend as a final lovers of the ancient world. Reports differ on how the burial was conducted. Plutarch described Antony's body carrying into Cleopatra's tomb, laid with her as she was already entombed. Roman poets like Horace and Propitius alternately vilified and admired her, casting her as both a dangerous AUCs and a noble enemy. In later centuries, Christian chronicler turned her into a warning against pride, while Arab historians preserved her as a sage queen, versed in science and magic. Each culture shaped her in its own image, each generation refashioning her death in its own lesson. By the time Shakespeare wrote of her, she had become theater's greatest queen, a woman whose end was romance, tragedy, and spectacle at once. To the Victorians, she was a fatal beauty, her body entwined with serpents in marble and paint. To modern scholars, she is neither demon nor goddess, but a ruler maneuvering against impossible odds. Her death, a calculation shaped by politics more than passion. That uncertainty ensures her story never settles. It remains a question, a mirror for the fears and desires of every age that retells it. Her tomb has never been found. Ancient writers agree that she was buried near Antony, but the exact site has vanished. Some point to a mausoleum in Alexandria. Others, too, top Cyrus Magna on the coast, where excavations continue to this day. Perhaps the chamber collapsed into the sea when the city's shoreline sank, or maybe it lies untouched beneath modern streets. No proof has been uncovered, and until it is a final resting place, remains as elusive as her true death. If you liked our video, please hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel.